How the British Empire became the greatest financial power in history. If you were asked to describe the defining characteristic of the British Empire at its zenith, the image that usually springs to mind is one of unparalleled military might. The scarlet tunics, the endless naval fleets, the disciplined logistics of an army that spanned every continent. We're taught that Britain ruled the waves, and therefore ruled the world. But this narrative, while visually compelling, misses the true, intricate mechanism of imperial dominance. It ignores the ledger, the interest rate, and the revolutionary concept of institutional trust. The greatest secret of British supremacy was not how much gold it amassed, but how skillfully it transformed abstract promises, credit, and debt into instruments far more potent and reliable than cannon fire. Consider the modern world. Every global corporation, every government, every major construction project relies on the ability to borrow vast sums of money based on nothing more than a projected future ability to repay, backed by the trust that the underlying institutions will remain stable. This architecture of faith, this global financial ecosystem, is the true enduring legacy of the British Empire. It wasn't born in a smoky factory during the Industrial Revolution, but in the sterile, high-ceilinged rooms of London institutions decades before the first steam engine sputtered to life. If you find value in understanding how history's greatest powers truly operated, beyond the superficial sweep of battles and kings, then you are in the right place. Please consider subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and joining us as we dissect the financial blueprint that built a global empire and, in doing so, laid the foundation for the entire modern economy. The common misconception is that Britain's rise began with textiles and coal. In reality, Britain's financial power was established by the late 17th century, driven by an acute political necessity, the need to fund relentless wars against formidable rivals, particularly France. War, as it turns out, is the most expensive endeavor known to man, and traditional methods of financing, taxing the populace into revolt, or relying on the king's personal credit, were inherently unstable. When a monarch defaults, the entire nation's credit collapses. This fragility was the Achilles heel of continental powers like France and Spain, whose rulers treated the national treasury as a personal piggy bank. The English, fresh from their glorious revolution and the establishment of a constitutional monarchy, devised an elegant and radical solution, the institutionalization of debt. In 1694, the Bank of England was founded, not primarily to print money, but to manage and service the national debt. This move was revolutionary because it shifted the burden and the risk. The debt was no longer the king's debt, it was the nation's debt, secured by Parliament and funded by reliable, predictable taxation. This seemingly bureaucratic maneuver transformed British credit overnight. By consolidating debt and guaranteeing repayment through a stable institution, the British government could borrow vast sums at low, predictable interest rates, often around 3%. Compare this to their rivals, who frequently paid 7, 8, or even 10%, and often had to renegotiate terms mid-conflict. This financial architecture was the ultimate geopolitical weapon. It meant that Britain could fight wars of attrition, outlasting opponents who might be individually wealthier or have larger populations, but who lacked the capacity to sustain long-term, low-cost borrowing. It was the difference between fighting with a finite pile of cash versus fighting with an exhaustible line of credit. While Spain had the gold from the Americas and France had the agricultural wealth of a massive population, Britain had the superior arithmetic. They had mastered the art of leveraging trust. This ability to finance global conflict cheaply allowed for the construction of the planet's preeminent navy, ensuring the security of trade routes that would soon connect London to every corner of the Earth. we are not just looking at history, we are looking at the origin story of global capitalism itself. Before delving into how the City of London weaponized insurance and commodities, we must first understand the dire context that necessitated this financial revolution. The late 17th century was marked by endemic financial crises across Europe. Governments were constantly on the brink of bankruptcy, often resorting to desperate measures like debasing currency or seizing assets. In England, the constant threat of invasion and the costly 9 Years' War required a permanent, reliable source of funding that transcended the whims of any single monarch. The solution wasn't found in a mine or a battlefield, but in the quiet confidence of investors, the Dutch, the city merchants, and the rising middle class, who finally believed that their loans to the state would be honored. This belief system, codified by the Bank of England and parliamentary oversight, was the true starting gun for the empire's financial supremacy. The initial context for this unprecedented rise was one of existential peril. Following the upheaval of the 17th century, including civil war and the Glorious Revolution, England's finances were precarious, its credit rating abysmal. The constant demand for funds to counter the aggressive expansion of Louis XIV of France forced a radical rethinking of state financing. France, under absolute control of the monarchy, could mobilize immense wealth quickly, but their system lacked the institutional stability necessary for long-term borrowing. When the French king needed money, he often relied on venal officials or short-term high-interest loans from private financiers, creating systemic instability. In stark contrast, the establishment of the Bank of England in 1694 created a distinct separation between the crown and the state's finances. This was the pivotal innovation. By offering subscribers annuities in exchange for loans and guaranteeing those repayments through dedicated parliamentary taxes, like the excise on beer and spirits, the British government signaled to the world that its debts were secure. This wasn't merely a mechanical accounting trick, it was a profound political commitment. The creditors, mostly wealthy domestic merchants and burgeoning financiers, now had a vested interest in the stability and success of the government. They were not just lenders, they were stakeholders in the state's solvency. This fusion of private capital and public need created a self-reinforcing cycle of confidence that continental rivals simply could not replicate. This explanation of economic restructuring clarifies why Britain, a relatively small nation, could consistently defeat larger, richer adversaries. While the French struggled to find capital during the War of the Spanish Succession, often resorting to disastrous currency devaluations, Britain was calmly issuing new bonds. The ability to finance protracted conflicts, the sinews of war, at favorable rates was the foundation of naval dominance. Ships might win battles, but stable bonds won the wars. The consistent, low-cost funding allowed Britain to maintain a permanent, professional navy and project power globally, securing the trade routes that would soon become the lifeblood of the empire. The ascent of Britain was, therefore, an ascent built on actuarial tables and legislative guarantees. It was a slow, deliberate process of financial engineering. By the mid-18th century, the national debt had grown exponentially, yet paradoxically, Britain's credit rating remained supreme. This was the first great historical paradox of modern finance. The more reliably a state manages its debt, the more debt it can safely carry. Debt, when properly institutionalized, becomes a source of strength, a reservoir of future purchasing power. This ability to absorb and manage colossal debt allowed Britain to seamlessly transition from mercantilism to industrial capitalism without the financial collapse that haunted other European powers. These transformations did not, however, eliminate the City of London entirely. The city proved incredibly adaptable. As the political empire dissolved through decolonization, the financial expertise remained.
London pivoted, transforming itself from the manager of imperial trade into a sophisticated, highly deregulated global financial hub, specializing in services like the Eurodollar market in the 1960s. The city demonstrated that institutional knowledge and legal infrastructure, the very tools that built the empire, could survive the loss of colonial territory. It remains, even today, one of the world's preeminent centers for banking, insurance, and financial innovation, a ghost structure of the empire that once was. The modern legacy of this financial engineering is inescapable. Every time a government issues a long-term bond, every time a multinational corporation seeks political risk insurance, every time the international community debates sovereign debt, they are operating within a framework perfected by the architects of the British Empire. The lesson is clear. The true power of an empire, or indeed any global power, is not measured purely in its physical assets or military strength, but in its institutional capacity to manage credit, sustain debt on a massive scale, and, most crucially, project unwavering confidence far beyond its geographical borders.
This understanding of financial history compels us to ask a crucial question. If institutional trust is the ultimate currency, how stable is the global financial architecture we rely on today? Think about that for a moment. Is our modern system of global debt truly protected by institutions or merely by the temporary dominance of a single currency? We invite you to share your reflections on this profound shift in the comments below. The entire history of the British Empire, from its humble beginnings to its global zenith and eventual decline, can be mapped onto a balance sheet. It was a centuries-long exercise in leveraging stability and confidence to purchase time, resources, and naval dominance. The empire was not just military, it was mathematical. If these deep dives into the mechanics of power and finance intrigue you, consider subscribing to ensure you don't miss our exploration of other hidden forces that shape our world. The story of global power is often less about who wins the battle and far more about who can afford to pay the bill. Crucially, this financial prowess rested upon a bedrock of legal and administrative uniformity that extended far beyond the mere issuance of bonds. While the Bank of England provided the capital, the true circulatory system of the empire was the rigorous enforcement of commercial law. London's preeminence was cemented because a merchant in Shanghai or Sydney knew with absolute certainty that a contract adjudicated under British common law would be honored, regardless of local political turbulence. The Privy Council's Judicial Committee served as the supreme court for the entire empire, guaranteeing a consistent legal standard for commercial disputes, thereby drastically lowering the risk profile for investors venturing into far-flung territories. This predictability was the lubricant for global investment, offering a stability that no fragmented continental legal system could match. Building on this, the mechanism of the gold standard itself acted as a profound, if sometimes brutal, guarantor of global faith in the pound. It wasn't just a political choice, it was a self-regulating economic discipline. If Britain ran a significant trade deficit, gold would flow out, forcing the Bank of England to raise interest rates. This contractionary measure slowed the domestic economy and attracted foreign capital, drawing gold back in. This cycle, often painful domestically, signaled to the international investment community that London prioritized the stability of the currency above all else, even above short-term domestic prosperity. This rigorous, often austere commitment to convertibility at a fixed rate transformed the pound from a national currency into a universally accepted global medium of exchange, the uncontested anchor currency of the 19th century. Moreover, the system demanded a sophisticated infrastructure to manage the sheer volume and velocity of global transactions. Beyond the physical movement of capital via steamships, the empire pioneered the use of communication technology as a financial weapon.
The laying of transoceanic telegraph cables, particularly the connection between London and Bombay in the 1870s, collapsed the time required for financial instruction from months to mere minutes. This unprecedented speed allowed London financiers to react instantly to price fluctuations in distant markets, arbitrage opportunities, and political crises, giving them an overwhelming information advantage over local competitors. The speed of information became synonymous with the speed of capital accumulation, ensuring that every corner of the global economy was tethered to the city's clock. Another crucial layer involved the sophisticated, often opaque methodologies for revenue extraction from the colonies. India, for instance, was compelled to pay vast home charges, administrative, military, and pension costs in sterling back to London. These charges, effectively a colossal annual tribute, were not simply paid in cash, they were facilitated through India's positive trade balance with the rest of the world. India exported goods, earned foreign currency, often silver, and then was forced to exchange that currency for sterling to pay its dues to the imperial center. This complex triangular flow ensured that even revenue generated outside the British Isles was inexorably drawn back to London, financing the very bureaucracy and military that maintained the system. This method transformed colonial productivity into institutional sterling liquidity, a financial siphon of unparalleled efficiency. Consequently, when we analyze the true depth of British financial power, we must recognize that it wasn't just the institutions themselves, but the culture of accountability and meticulous record-keeping that supported them. The British civil service, often criticized for its rigidity, was essential for maintaining the credibility required for global finance. The consistent, non-corrupt administration of customs, taxes, and debt servicing meant that investors were not relying on the integrity of a single individual, but on the integrity of an impersonal, enduring state machine. Now, consider how this applies when you face a potential investment today. Would you place your capital in a jurisdiction where the rules change daily, or where the rule of law is demonstrably consistent? The British Empire understood that bureaucratic reliability was just as valuable as gold reserves. This infrastructure, in turn, allowed for the development of highly specialized financial instruments that further deepened London's control. For instance, the acceptance house system, where elite merchant banks guaranteed bills of exchange from global trade, effectively allowed a small group of London institutions to underwrite the credit risk of the entire world's commerce. By accepting a bill, a London bank essentially stamped it with the gold-backed trustworthiness of the city, making the bill instantly liquid and tradable anywhere. This subtle mechanism meant that even when goods were moving between two foreign nations, the credit risk was being managed, insured, and ultimately profited from in London. It was a subtle, yet absolute control over the global flow of value. Reflecting on this complex journey through centuries of fiscal maneuvering, the overarching pattern that emerges is not one of mere territorial acquisition, but the relentless pursuit of systemic efficiency. We have observed how the intangible concept of collective belief, institutional trust, was meticulously engineered and deployed as the ultimate strategic asset. This mastery lay in transforming the state's very liabilities into sophisticated levers of geopolitical power, allowing for sustained action far exceeding the immediate resources of the home islands. The true innovation was the creation of a financial clockwork mechanism where every cog, from the administration of distant tariffs to the guaranteeing of oceanic risk, was calibrated to ensure the predictable, unidirectional flow of capital toward the central clearinghouse. The true power of an empire, therefore, lies in its capacity to transform an ephemeral construct, trust, into a hard, tradable asset. It is a power that transcends physical borders, operates silently through fiber optic cables, and dictates terms through interest rate differentials. If we are to truly understand the dynamics of global influence in the 21st century, the rise of new economic giants, the fragility of the international monetary system, and the immense power wielded by financial capitals, we must first appreciate the historical precedent set by the British. The ships are long gone, the red maps have faded, but the ledger remains. The true practice begins now, looking beyond the headlines and the spectacle of politics to discern the quiet, relentless force of financial architecture that continues to shape our destiny. If these deep structural analyses of history and power fascinate you, consider subscribing to ensure you join us as we continue to dissect the forces that truly govern our world. The profound lesson of the British Empire is that to truly rule the world, one must first master the arithmetic.